What is one item that we use constantly in our everyday lives without even realizing it? It can be found in television sets, computers, and spaces both private and public. I'm talking about the common loudspeaker. Hi, my name is Oliver, and ever since I was about 6 years old, I have been fascinated with studying speakers, their characteristics, how they compare with one another, what the properties are, how they work, and how they can be used. So this is the basic anatomy of the loudspeaker. On the top, you have your dust cap, your surround, and your cone. And then underneath the dust cap, you have your voice coil. Beyond that, you have your lower suspension or spider. You have the positive and negative tinsel leads, which bring the signal from your amplifier down into the voice coil. And then on the bottom here, you have your permanent magnet. And then surrounding the entire assembly is the basket or frame of the speaker. All these parts, cone, coil, magnet, suspension, spider, frame, every single part works together to create the vibrations that we hear as music and sound. Remarkably, the basic components of the loudspeaker haven't really changed since being commercially introduced in 1926. However, they are constantly evolving in terms of technology, materials, and design. This video will briefly cover that history and evolution. Let's start in the 1950s, when things really began to evolve rapidly with the advent of mass-market consumer electronics. During this time, the main goal of audio engineers was to improve the quality of loudspeakers by employing new materials and designs, including larger magnets, voice coils with higher power handlings, and much more compliant and responsive cones and surrounds. This met consumer demands for louder and much more powerful speakers. This tremendous innovation was driven by notable audio engineers and entrepreneurs such as Amara Bose of the Bose Corporation and James Bolo Lansing, founder of JBL and co-founder of Altec Lansing. Working out of facilities in Massachusetts and California, these individuals were among the pioneers who set the pace and standard for loudspeaker design and fidelity. And so beginning in the 80s and continuing well into the 90s and 2000s, the miniaturization of home electronics became very popular to consumers. This is especially true with audio systems. Walkmans, portable tape players, and headphones all became very popular at the time. Even the home stereo began to get smaller and smaller, as consumers wanted that same concert quality sound in a much smaller package. And thanks to the evolution of various components, this became possible. With the introduction of Bluetooth technology, the demand for portable audio systems was literally amplified. Bluetooth speakers are now among the most popular item on the market. The design process of these speakers always presents new challenges to audio engineers. How do you get the most bass and the most sound out of a very small speaker? And so to solve these problems, both driver and amplifier technology has improved significantly. Recently, drivers have moved from the much more common ferrite or ceramic magnet to the much more efficient and small neodymium magnet. Amplifiers have also become more advanced with the introduction of DSPs, which not only protect the driver from distortion, but that also tailor the sound and characteristics of the driver to the preferences of the listener. Now, that's a brief history of a few key developments in loudspeaker technology. Now, if there's one area in which these developments are very evident, it's in the most prominent consumer device, the television set. As TVs have changed over time in shape, size, and consumer demand, loudspeaker suppliers have been forced to adapt to these new design constraints. In the 1970s, TVs were chunky boxes containing large CRTs and circuit boards. And because of the large amount of space available inside TV housings, as well as lower demand for sound quality, internal TV speakers at that time had very few, if not any, design constraints. Fast forward to the late 80s and early 90s, TVs were getting larger and larger as the idea of a home theater system became very appealing to consumers. However, not everyone wanted a room full of surround sound speakers, and so TV manufacturers began integrating separate speaker enclosures and even separate subwoofer enclosures inside of their TVs in order to meet consumer demands for theater-like viewing and listening experiences. For example, consider this massive plastic tube. This is actually a subwoofer enclosure which was integrated into a TV's chassis. Its purpose was to simply enhance the low-end response of the television sound system. These TVs were enormous, however, they would only get smaller and thinner over time, placing more design constraints on component design. In the early 2000s, flat-screen TVs began to replace conventional CRT systems, given their similar profile. These were very expensive TVs, and so consumers naturally expected sound quality to justify the price. Designers also had to radically rethink speaker enclosure design, and their solutions were quite impressive. For example, this is one out of 2 subwoofer enclosures which came installed in a Panasonic plasma television. Its odd shape comes from the fact that it had to fit inside the tight spaces of the TV while retaining as much internal air volume as possible. And because of its small size, a base reflex port design on the enclosure was simply not possible. So instead, some manufacturers began using passive radiators. Now, passive radiators use the changing internal air pressure from the active driver to extend the low-end response of the overall speaker enclosure. And finally, consider today's ultra-thin flat-screen televisions that can be as thin as your thumb. This presented speaker suppliers with an even greater design challenge. Not only did they have less air volume to work with, but extremely limited room for speaker excursion, both of which are critical to sound quality. For example, consider the many unique features of this speaker system from an LG flat-screen television set. The base port on this subwoofer enclosure is made as long as possible and flared on both ends to squeeze the lowest frequencies out of this very thin driver without any port turbulence. Because of its thin size, the subwoofer itself is mechanically very limited, and so this ribbed surround is used to maintain excursion control and accuracy at high volumes. Of course, this TV speaker system also includes 2 left and right satellite speakers containing tweeters and mid-ranges. In order to maximize the internal airspace of the satellite speaker enclosure, the magnet of the mid-range driver is actually mounted externally rather than inside the enclosure. Also note that the tweeter and mid-ranges are mounted to fire at a 90-degree angle. Not only does this create a much more spacious sound experience for the viewer, but the mid-ranges are also angled downwards to reflect off any hard surfaces below the TV. This also minimizes the visual footprint that these speakers have on the front bezel of the TV, as an uninterrupted screen size often takes priority when designing these TV sets. So that concludes my brief overview of loudspeaker history over the past 70 years, from both the technology and consumer perspectives. For me, researching these developments has been incredibly fascinating. Ever since I was 6 years old, this has been my hobby, and through independent research, I have become highly knowledgeable on this topic. A topic that spans industrial design, acoustics, electronics, music, engineering, material science, and consumer markets. I am looking for a college which will allow me to explore and deepen my expertise in these fields. And if you have any further interests on these topics, feel free to visit my YouTube channel where I exchange information and ideas with a global group of friends who share my interest. Thank you so much for watching.